The most dangerous predator isn't the one who roars, it's the one who whispers. Covert narcissists cause twice the psychological damage of their obvious counterparts, yet most therapists can't even identify them. Carl Jung discovered this hidden psychological truth a century ago, calling it the shadow's perfect disguise. By the end of this video, you'll be able to spot the subtle manipulation tactics that 97% of people miss, and finally understand why you've been feeling crazy in certain relationships that seem supportive on the surface, but leave you emotionally bankrupt beneath. Maybe you've been in a relationship where something felt off. Not obviously wrong, but unsettling. Like walking through a house where all the furniture has been moved just 2 inches to the left. Everything looks right, but you keep bumping into things. Perhaps you've noticed how after certain interactions, you walk away feeling drained, confused, or questioning your own memory. Did I really say that? Am I actually that selfish? Maybe I am too sensitive after all. Or you might be asking yourself why, despite all your therapy and growth, you still feel trapped in a cycle with people who seem supportive on the surface, but somehow leave you feeling worse. The friend who always has a bigger problem whenever you need support. The partner who's an advocate for mental health on social media, but dismisses your feelings in private. The family member who presents themselves as your biggest supporter while subtly undermining every achievement. This isn't just your experience. Millions of people worldwide are caught in relationships with covert narcissists, individuals who don't fit the stereotypical narcissist image of grandiosity and obvious self-absorption. Instead, they present as sensitive, vulnerable, even victimized, and conventional psychology often misses them entirely, focusing on the loud, obvious traits while overlooking the quiet devastation of covert narcissism. I recently worked with a client whose therapist had actually encouraged her to be more understanding of her partner's sensitivity, not recognizing that this sensitivity was actually a sophisticated control mechanism. By the time she found me, she'd spent 3 years doubting her own reality and walking on eggshells around someone who had convinced both her and her previous therapist that he was the vulnerable one in the relationship. But what if I told you that Carl Jung identified this exact pattern almost a century ago? His understanding of the shadow and persona doesn't just help you understand why covert narcissists are so destructive. It gives you the psychological tools to identify them before they cause irreparable damage to your sense of self and your ability to trust your own perceptions. The stakes couldn't be higher. While overt narcissists might damage your reputation or finances, covert narcissists target something far more precious: your psychological sovereignty, your ability to trust your own perception of reality. Jung called this psychic murder, and it's time we expose how it happens. In the 1920s, Jung observed what he called the persona and the shadow, 2 fundamental aspects of our psychology. The persona is the mask we wear in public, while the shadow contains all the parts of ourselves we reject, hide, or deny. Jung saw that when people refused to acknowledge their shadow aspects, those traits didn't simply disappear. They emerged in destructive, unconscious ways. He wrote in his essays on analytical psychology, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. To become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real." This recognition is precisely what the covert narcissist avoids at all costs. Today, we call these manifestations narcissistic traits, particularly in the covert or vulnerable form. But Jung's approach goes deeper than contemporary therapy, because it doesn't just identify behavioral patterns. It explains the psychological mechanism that creates the perfect storm of manipulation, gaslighting, and emotional destruction. In Jung's framework, the covert narcissist is someone who has completely identified with their persona, their carefully crafted image of vulnerability and sensitivity, while simultaneously projecting their disowned shadow onto others. This creates what modern psychology would later call the ultimate double bind, a relationship where you can never win, where your reality is constantly invalidated, and where your emotional resources are systematically drained. Jung described it as the hook and the bait. The persona is the appealing bait of vulnerability that draws you in, while the shadow is the hidden hook that captures and wounds you. Understanding this mechanism is the first step toward freedom. Jung's first insight was what he called the wounded healer archetype, the way certain individuals wear their wounds not as something to heal, but as a form of identity and power. Now, I know this sounds like an abstract concept, but imagine your psyche as a theatre production. In this theatre, everyone has masks they wear in different scenes of life. The overt narcissist wears a shiny gold mask of grandiosity that's obvious to everyone watching. But the covert narcissist, they wear what looks like no mask at all, what appears to be their vulnerable, authentic face. Here's the twist Jung discovered. This non-mask is actually the most sophisticated mask of all. It's designed to bypass your psychological defenses completely. While you'd put up walls against someone obviously self-centered, you naturally open up to someone who appears wounded, sensitive, and introspective. I recently worked with Sarah, who spent 3 years with a partner who constantly shared childhood traumas, spoke about emotional depth, and even criticized narcissistic people in their lives. Yet somehow, every conversation ended with Sarah consoling them, even when she was the one who had been hurt. Her needs were always secondary to their emotional wounds. This isn't coincidence, it's strategy. Another client, David, described his experience with his covert narcissist friend. He would share these incredibly vulnerable stories about his depression and anxiety. I felt honored he trusted me. But looking back, I realized he never actually listened to my struggles. If I brought up my issues, he'd either one-up me with a worse problem or subtly imply I wasn't handling things as well as he would. I spent 2 years feeling like an emotional failure next to his enlightened approach to suffering. This vulnerability mask is particularly effective with empaths and helpers, people whose identity includes being supportive and understanding. The covert narcissist leverages your best qualities against you, turning your empathy into a weapon of self-destruction. I know this might be hitting close to home for some of you. Take a moment to breathe. What Jung discovered about the vulnerable mask is profound, and it's going to challenge everything you thought you knew about empathy and support in relationships. Are you ready for the next revelation? Jung's second insight goes even deeper. He identified what we now understand as inverted shadow projection. Traditional shadow projection is when we deny our negative qualities and see them in others. But covert narcissists do something far more insidious. They project their positive qualities onto themselves and their negative qualities onto you. Imagine your psyche as a room with various objects representing your qualities, both light and shadow. In a normal relationship, both people acknowledge both their treasures and their junk. The overt narcissist simply claims all treasures are theirs while denying they own any junk. But the covert narcissist does something truly sinister. They enter your psychological room with mirrors, reflecting your best qualities back at you initially, mirroring. Then, gradually, they begin swapping these mirrors. Suddenly, you're looking at reflections of negative qualities that aren't yours. They belong to the narcissist. Meanwhile, they've stolen reflections of your positive qualities and claim them as their own. Think about Michael, who began therapy convinced he was selfish and emotionally unavailable. During our work, he realized his partner had been saying things like, "Unlike you, I really care about emotional connection, and I wish you could be empathetic like me." The devastating truth: Michael was the emotional caretaker who sacrificed everything for connection, while his partner gave nothing. This mirror swapping left him unable to recognize his own reflection. Lisa's experience demonstrates how devastating this can be. My partner would constantly accuse me of being manipulative whenever I expressed needs. If I asked for more quality time, he'd say I was emotionally blackmailing him. After months of this, I started prefacing every request with, "I know this is probably manipulative of me, but..." I completely lost trust in my own intentions. Meanwhile, he was the one actually using sophisticated manipulation, making me doubt myself while positioning himself as the victim of my controlling behavior. Jung observed that this inversion is particularly destructive because it doesn't just damage your relationship, it damages your relationship with yourself. When your genuine qualities are stolen and your partner's negative traits are projected onto you, you lose the ability to recognize yourself. This is why recovering from relationships with covert narcissists often takes longer than recovery from more obvious abuse. Okay, I need you to stay with me here because what I'm about to share might be difficult to accept, but it's the key to your freedom. This mirror manipulation doesn't just happen once. It's a sustained campaign that can last years, and its effects can persist long after the relationship ends. Jung's third insight was about what he called complexes, emotional patterns formed in childhood that remain unconscious until triggered. Covert narcissists are masterful at identifying and activating these complexes, creating what Jung called neurotic entanglement. Imagine your psyche has invisible buttons installed during childhood, a not good enough button from a critical parent, an abandonment button from early loss, or a responsibility button from having to grow up too quickly. Most people bump into these buttons accidentally in relationships. The covert narcissist, however, seems to have a supernatural ability to find your buttons, not just to press them occasionally, but to wire them to a remote control they can activate at will. This isn't random. Jung observed, it's because they intuitively recognize in you the same wounds they've disowned in themselves. Elena came to me confused about why she kept accepting mistreatment from her friend Rachel. During our work, she realized Rachel's pattern of withdrawing affection and then praising Elena's patience was activating a childhood complex from Elena's relationship with her emotionally unavailable mother. Elena wasn't just tolerating Rachel's behavior, she was unconsciously trying to heal her childhood wound by finally earning the inconsistent love she never received. Thomas shared a similar experience with his business partner. He knew exactly when to praise me in ways my father never did. I'd work 80-hour weeks just to hear him say, "I'm proud of you," something I'd craved my entire life. Then he'd withdraw that approval over minor issues, sending me into spirals of overwork and anxiety. I was a successful executive with an MBA, reduced to a desperate child seeking approval. I couldn't see it until my wife pointed out that I was acting like a completely different person around him. What makes this so powerful is that these complexes bypass your conscious mind completely. You're not choosing to react. You're being triggered at a primal pre-verbal level that feels overwhelming and uncontrollable. Jung observed that this creates a psychological addiction to the very person who's hurting you, as they become both the source of your wound and your only perceived path to healing. This next part explains the most devastating aspect of covert narcissism. Take a deep breath because understanding this will change everything about how you see these relationships. Jung's fourth insight was what he called traumatic synchronicity, what modern psychology terms trauma bonding, but with a crucial difference when it comes to covert narcissism. With overt narcissists, the trauma bond forms through obvious cycles of abuse and reconciliation. With covert narcissists, it's formed through something far more subtle. Imagine your emotional well-being is like your body's need for water. The covert narcissist first creates an artificial drought by subtly undermining your other relationships, questioning your reality, and creating problems that only they can solve. Then, they offer small sips of validation, understanding, and connection. Not enough to truly nourish you, but just enough to keep you desperately thirsty. This isn't just dependency, it's a biochemical addiction. Jung didn't have the neuroscience we have today, but he understood the principle. These relationships create actual changes in your brain chemistry through unpredictable intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism that makes gambling so addictive. James described his 6-year relationship with his covert narcissist boss as emotional heroin. His boss would oscillate between profound private praise and subtle public undermining. The highs of finally earning her approval were so intense that I endured years of anxiety, waiting for those moments of validation, he explained. His colleagues saw a supportive mentor relationship. Only James felt the desperate addiction beneath the surface. Sophia's experience with her sister illustrates how insidious this can become. My sister would criticize my parenting constantly, but occasionally she'd say something like, "You're actually doing better than Mom did." Those rare moments of approval meant more to me than praise from anyone else, precisely because they were so rare. I'd spend weeks trying to earn another moment of validation from her. Meanwhile, my husband was consistently supportive, but his praise didn't give me the same rush because it wasn't coming after periods of withdrawal and criticism. What's particularly devastating about this invisible trauma bond is that others rarely see it. While friends might intervene if they witness obvious abuse, they often admire your relationship with the covert narcissist, seeing only the carefully curated public persona. This external validation of a harmful relationship adds another layer of confusion and self-doubt. Jung observed that breaking these invisible bonds requires not just leaving the relationship, but understanding the unconscious mechanism that created the addiction in the first place. Without this understanding, you might physically leave while remaining psychologically entangled, or worse, find yourself drawn to similar dynamics in new relationships. Now, I know this has been a lot to take in. Jung's insights can feel overwhelming at first because they're so much deeper than what we usually hear about narcissistic relationships. But this depth is exactly what's going to set you free. Are you ready to learn how? Jung didn't just identify these patterns, he provided a pathway out. Here are specific, actionable steps based on his analytical psychology. Step 1. Keep a small notebook where you immediately write down exactly what was said in conversations that left you confused. Don't analyze, just record verbatim. When the narcissist claims, "I never said that," you have concrete evidence rather than just your doubted memory. Another application. After interactions that leave you feeling inexplicably bad about yourself, write down 3 objective facts about what occurred, not interpretations, but observable events. They arrived 45 minutes late. When I mentioned being hungry, they sighed and looked at their phone. They changed the subject when I brought up my promotion. This creates an objective record separate from the emotional confusion. The key is consistency. Don't try to document everything. Just capture moments that trigger confusion or self-doubt. Step 2. If the covert narcissist has positioned themselves as the empathetic one while painting you as insensitive, actively practice one small act of compassion daily that has nothing to do with them. Notice how natural it feels, which indicates it's actually your quality, not theirs. One client, Marcos, whose partner had labeled him financially irresponsible while secretly accumulating debt, began keeping track of every financial decision he made for a month. He discovered he was actually quite prudent and thoughtful with money, the opposite of the identity he'd been assigned. Each responsible choice became an act of reclaiming his true nature. The key is performing these actions away from the narcissist's awareness or validation. Your reclamation happens in private. Step 3. The next time you feel intense emotion in response to something subtle the narcissist does, pause and ask, "How old do I feel right now?" If the answer is, like a child, name the specific age and memory this interaction echoes. This breaks the unconscious activation. Rebecca realized her husband's subtle sighs when she was speaking triggered intense shame. When she asked herself, "How old do I feel?" she immediately connected to being 9 years old, when her teacher had sighed dramatically while she struggled to read aloud. Simply recognizing, "This is my 9-year-old self responding, not my adult self," gave her enough distance to respond differently. The key is catching the emotional reaction before responding. Practice this first with smaller triggers. Step 4. Identify one emotional routine you have with the narcissist. Perhaps how they text you at specific times when you're vulnerable, or how they use certain phrases that hook you back in. For 1 week, consciously disrupt this pattern by being unavailable at that time, or not responding to that specific phrase. A client, Aidan, noticed his mother always called him when she knew he was driving home from work, a time when he was captive and couldn't easily end the conversation. These calls inevitably left him feeling inadequate. He broke the pattern by turning his phone off during that commute and calling her at a time when he felt centered instead. This simple change dramatically shifted the power dynamic. Another application. If you know certain topics always lead to feeling diminished, your achievements, your other relationships, your appearance, practice introducing these topics yourself in a controlled way, rather than waiting for the narcissist to weaponize them. This reverses the pattern of reactivity. The key is changing just one pattern at a time. Don't attempt a complete relationship overhaul at once. Start today by simply observing without judgment how your body feels during and after interactions with the suspected covert narcissist. This week, implement the reality anchoring practice with your notebook. Over the next month, gradually add the other practices, one per week, starting with the one that resonates most strongly. Remember, as Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. These practices make the invisible patterns conscious, returning your psychological freedom. So what did Jung teach us about covert narcissism? 3 profound insights. First, the mask of vulnerability is often the most sophisticated disguise of narcissism, designed to bypass your defenses and exploit your empathy. Second, shadow projection happens in reverse, with your positive qualities stolen, while their negative traits are assigned to you, creating profound identity confusion. And most importantly, the activation of childhood complexes creates a biochemical addiction disguised as an emotional connection. This is why Jung's approach succeeds, where conventional therapy often fails. While modern psychology focuses primarily on identifying narcissistic behaviors, Jung's analytical approach reveals the underlying psychological mechanisms that make these relationships so addictive and damaging. It explains not just what happens, but why you stay despite the pain. Jung's perspective offers something vital that symptom-focused approaches miss. It returns agency to you. Rather than positioning you as simply a victim of someone else's pathology, it illuminates the unconscious patterns that keep you entangled and gives you specific tools to disentangle yourself, regardless of whether the narcissist ever changes or acknowledges their behavior. When you apply Jung's insights to relationships with covert narcissists, you don't just escape a harmful situation, you reclaim parts of yourself you never realized were stolen. You move from confusion to clarity, from self-doubt to self-trust, and from psychological bondage to authentic freedom. If Jung's insights into covert narcissism resonated with you, subscribe and hit the notification bell to join our community of philosophical healers who are reclaiming their psychological sovereignty one insight at a time. Tell me in the comments, which of Jung's insights hit you the hardest? The vulnerability mask, the inverted shadow projection, or the activation of childhood complexes? And what aspect of Jungian psychology would you like me to explore next in relation to healing from narcissistic relationships? Remember, as Jung himself said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." Today, you've taken the first step toward conscious choosing.